Hello and welcome. I'm Alan Borsuk. I'm a senior fellow at Marquette Law School, and this program is part of a long-standing and very honorable series of programs at the law school, many of them featuring my colleague Mike Goucher, in which we bring in interesting and important people to discuss interesting and important subjects. If you go back not too long ago, and for a number of years, I know you would have found Deb Kerr and Jill Underley at the same events in many cases. They're both superintendents of Wisconsin districts. They were both active in Wisconsin and national superintendent organizations. And I suspect they had a pretty collegial relationship. I'm not sure that's quite the word I would use at the moment. They are the two candidates for the Wisconsin Superintendent of Public Instruction in a race that's been fairly contentious and definitely has some partisan coloring. And we are honored to have both of them with us today to discuss their vision for the office that they are seeking. The election is April 6th. Jill Underley is the superintendent of the Pecatonica Area School District, southwest of Madison, 35 or 40 miles, a generally small rural district. She's been in that position since 2015. Prior to that, among other things, worked at the State Department of Public Instruction in various roles, and prior to that at UW-Madison in administrative roles dealing mostly with student services. Deb Kerr retired last June after 13 years as superintendent of Brown Deer Schools, a Milwaukee suburb, and has a long career as a teacher, administrator, and superintendent in Wisconsin and beyond. The office of the Wisconsin Superintendent of Public Instruction is genuinely unique in American education politics. Most states have a statewide school board, something like the Board of Regents of the UW system. Wisconsin does not. There is no other state that does not have a statewide Board of Education, but does have an independently elected state chief school officer. So, as I've said a number of times, in this case, the cheesehead stands alone, that this is a distinctive position. It's not a terribly powerful position, if I may say so. The state superintendent cannot set the budget for either schools or even for the Department of Public Instruction. That's done by the legislature and the governor. State superintendent really can't even tell school districts an awful lot of what to do. Wisconsin has a very strong local control heritage. So the superintendent can't order what textbooks to use or curriculum. In the current situation, can't order schools in general, whether to be open or closed. And yet it is the most influential, perhaps, and certainly the highest rung on the ladder of education advocacy in the state. So it is an important position. We will begin with giving each of the candidates basically an opportunity for an opening statement in the form of saying, what would be your main priorities as state superintendent? I think we'll do this part in alphabetical order. So Dr. Kerr.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. And thank you, Alan and the Marquette Law University, for sponsoring this event today. And good morning, Jill. Deb Kerr, I am uniquely qualified to serve as the next state superintendent in these unprecedented times. My passion and experience serving children in all education sectors for the past 40 years has prepared me well. I have walked many miles in teachers' and leaders' shoes and served as a public school superintendent. I'm parochial educated and public school dedicated for 34 years. I'm an award-winning teacher, principal, high school athletic director, back-to-back state championship basketball coach, and proud to be a Wisconsin superintendent for the last 20 years. I started out my superintendent experience at Wilmot Grade School, a very small rural 4K through 8th grade school in western Kenosha County with only 150 kids. I also assisted with a successful consolidation of Trevor-Wilmot Consolidated School District, and then it was up north to Brown Deer, a first-tier suburb of Milwaukee. As the superintendent in Brown Deer for the past 13 years, I served over 1,600 students, and we became one of the most diverse school systems in the state of Wisconsin, with over 80% students of color, 50% economically disadvantaged, and speaking 23 different languages. And we were successful at closing the achievement gap while also raising graduation rates for all of our students. These student-centered strategies we put into action achieve transformational results, and these will be scalable across the state. I have a vision to create a world-class education system that is the highest performing, not only in our state, but highest performing in our country. We have to get Wisconsin to the top of the list instead of at the bottom of the list. Another unique distinction between me and my opponent is that I have elected presidential leadership experience at the local, state, and national levels that has prepared me well at a time when our students are facing such enormous learning losses, especially our Black and Brown students from rural, suburban, and urban areas. We are going to need a champion of excellence and equity to lead our state out of this crisis and recover from this pandemic, and that is me. My 40+ years of experience do matter, and successful leadership in educating economically disadvantaged students, English language learners, high percentages of children with disabilities and special needs, and working very successfully with Black and Brown students and families. Now more than ever, we need to stand together on the behalf of all children and all that we serve every day. As the next state superintendent, I will serve the needs of all children. I will work with all stakeholders to create one statewide system of accountability, of full transparency, and equitable access. Each one of us is an important stakeholder in delivering high quality education for every single student in Wisconsin. This must be our Wisconsin promise, where all kids and families win. Thank you.
Dr. Underley.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Alan. Good morning, Deb. I'm Jill Underley. I'm the current superintendent for the Pecatonica Area School District in Southwest Wisconsin. I'm running for state superintendent because I believe that every child, every day, should have access to a great public education, a solid foundation for which kids can live the rest of their lives. As a former teacher, principal, and now as a local superintendent, I have a proven record of high student achievement, innovation, and sound financial management of my school district. I've been a leader in the state by offering full-day, high-quality preschool and childcare to all families, because high-quality preschool helps kids perform better in school and helps families who struggle with childcare costs. As superintendent, I'll look to expand this to all kids. My priorities are to reduce the opportunity gaps and disrupt the systems of inequity by investing in early childhood education, teacher recruitment and retention, mental health funding, and revising our school funding formula so it works for all schools and all kids. Throughout the last year, I've safely led my district through very challenging times during this pandemic. I'm the only candidate who has done that. I've worked hard to safely reopen our schools in my district for in-person learning because I know how critical it is to our kids' education, as well as to our workforce and our economy. And that's why safely transitioning schools to face-to-face learning will be a priority for me. Thank you for having me today.
I'd like to focus as much as we can on things that would actually be on the turf of the state superintendent. I would start with the teacher pipeline. Teacher licensing and relations with higher education programs that train teachers is very much in the domain of the Department of Public Instruction, which one of the two of you will head. Let's start with Dr. Underley. What is the state of the teacher pipeline? And by that I mean recruiting teachers, keeping teachers, building up the quality of the teaching workforce. What's the state of it, and what would you do going forward to make it stronger?
Yeah, I would say that there's certainly some perils right now with teacher education, recruitment and retention and licensing. As somebody who is hiring teachers all the time, somebody who's in a rural district, neighboring suburban and urban areas, we lose teachers quite frequently to higher paying districts. And so what has happened the past 10 years especially, post-Act 10, is that we've had a lag in teacher pay and benefits, which has deterred a lot of people from entering the teaching profession. It has also encouraged many people to retire early because they were fearful of losing their benefits. So what we have found is that we are not getting many candidates for very high need positions like special education, STEM, math, science, for example, tech ed, computer science, but even applicants that we used to get, or positions we used to get lots of applicants for, like social studies or elementary education, there's just not many. The data has shown that post-Act 10, that the number of admissions has dropped precipitously in our teacher education programs in the UW system. Part of that has to do with the fact that teaching is not once the attractive profession it was. So we need to make sure that we appreciate and pay our teachers well, and especially for their knowledge and their skills and their abilities. But we also need to recruit more teachers of color into the pipeline. Long term, if we do not reinforce our pipeline for teachers, that will have an impact on the number of administrators that we have too, because teachers become administrators. But again, we have to work with our schools and colleges of education, who can help work with our public schools, like our high schools and our middle schools, to recruit more into the profession. But as a society, if we value public education, we need to make sure that we are paying people for their knowledge and their skills. And that way we can ensure that every child, no matter where they are, if they're in a rural area, urban area, or suburban, has a passionate educator, mentoring them and teaching them.
Dr. Kerr.
Well, first of all, I want to make a point of clarification. I was a superintendent when I closed my school on March 13th. And Wisconsin needs a superintendent who not only led during the pandemic, but I did so in my region and all across the nation. And I'm still coaching and leading as a superintendent in my consultant business. And so while we were in a safer at home order, my opponent decided to launch her campaign during that time. And so while other of us were feeding kids and getting technology and making sure teachers had resources. So I don't think this is a distinction. In fact, I feel that this is a deterrent, and I'm not running for a promotion to be the next state superintendent. I'm running to teach kids and be supportive of all educators. And that's why we have to do a better job of retaining, attracting, and recruiting teachers into the pipeline. I served on the UW System Task Force of teachers and educators, and we also understand where the barriers are. We understand that cost is prohibitive. We understand that some people can't do their student teaching and quit their full-time job to make that happen. And so we need to be very intentional on how we recruit the best and the brightest into our classrooms, just like I did in Brown Deer. In Brown Deer, I had the most diverse teaching staff and administrative team in the suburbs because I made it a priority. I needed to make sure my kids saw people like them so that they could aspire into teaching or a leadership role. So all of my administrators were African American. The superintendent today in Brown Deer is the first African American female state superintendent. And so that's going to be critical as we grow our own programs. Look at Educators Rising curriculums. We could do this regionally across the entire state to recruit excellent candidates into the field. And so I believe it's very important that we recognize that teacher shortages are not the only sector that we need to fill. There are shortages all across Wisconsin in various workforce sectors. And so we need to work together. And I do agree with my opponent that the universities are going to be critical in this partnership to make sure that we're putting great teachers into our classroom and not providing barriers with the DPI so that they can't get licensure.
School funding. If you were state superintendent currently, what kind of budget would you have forwarded to the governor? And how would it compare to the one that was forwarded by the current superintendent, who I should add is not running for election, was appointed by now Governor Evers when he stepped up from being superintendent. But what kind of budget proposal would you make, and particularly related to school funding, local school funding? Deb Kerr first this time.
Thank you. Well, I had a great conversation with the current superintendent, Carolyn Stanford Taylor, because she was really proud that this was her equity budget. And I would agree with her because she was putting money in the resources that would serve some of our most vulnerable and marginalized kids across the state. And so I do agree that we need additional reimbursement for children with special needs, because that will create winners for all school districts across the state. So what I did at Brown Deer, we proposed 90% reimbursement. And as the next state superintendent, I would like us to get to 90% reimbursement of children with special needs over the next 2 biennial budgets, because that would free up money in our regular education budget so that school districts had more choices and options on how to manage their services. I agree with more funding for English language learners at Brown Deer with 23 languages. That was a challenge, and making sure that they had the services that they needed. We would also need to target the low revenue ceiling issues, because I think there's opportunity there. And I know the governor has supported some of that, but I think we can do better. And I also feel that I have great relationships with people on both sides of the aisle, but especially with our joint finance chair, Senator Markline, who's recently endorsed me. And I think we can get a lot done by focusing on the things that need to get done to support all of our schools, because we want high quality schools. But we also want to invest funding and make sure that we're getting a return on our investment and getting improved outcomes.
Dr. Underley.
All right, thank you so much for the question. I just want to respond quickly to a couple things that Dr. Kerr had mentioned. When she says, for example, that she's a pandemic superintendent, that she was there on March 16th when the state of Wisconsin closed its buildings. I was there all summer as well. I was there in the spring. We were delivering food. We were working it out with our families. We were making our buildings safe. We were investing in PPE, hiring extra staff, like I said, food services, delivering meals, delivering technology, and then all the work that went in over the summer. My administrative team, my school board members, my teachers never worked so hard in their lives to make sure that our kids would be safe and that they would have a building that they could reopen and have kids come back to in the fall. So I take insult to that. But I also feel that, when she talks as well as with the UW System Task Force on teacher licensing, that loosened requirements for our teachers, which, not many people agreed with. But as far as school funding, the budget that, Carolyn Stanford Taylor and Governor Evers have proposed is a pre-pandemic budget. This is what our kids need in our schools right now. And I agree with the budget wholeheartedly. Increase in high poverty aid, special education increase in reimbursement, ELL increase, sparsity aid, high transportation. These are things that not just urban school districts need, but every school district needs. Urban and rural school districts have so many things in common, especially when you look at high poverty, you look at high transportation costs. And ultimately at the end, I want every kid in Wisconsin to have access to a great education and be in a great school with great teachers. Every kid needs access to technology. We need to fund libraries. We need to fund rural internet. We need gyms and we need healthcare. We need great sports programs and we need special education services. And that's what this budget does. The current funding formula that we've had in place is broken. Rich kids get great schools, everyone else gets left behind. So we need to make sure that our funding is more equitable so that the wealthy districts still have great schools, but every other school, rural, urban, suburban, where kids' parents have less money, also have great schools. We can fix this problem though. And that's why I applaud Governor Evers' budget. It is a step forward. The Blue Ribbon Commission report to fix the formula is a great step forward. And I'll be solving this problem every day as superintendent. So When Dr. Kerr says that there are winners and there are losers, there sure are. There sure are. But by supporting voucher schools, for example, and expansion like she does, that sets up winners and losers in our public schools, especially our highest poverty schools.
Well, I suppose we should turn to the voucher issue. I say that with some reluctance because it's so divisive. But what would each of you envision as what you'd like to see unfolding for the voucher program in the next several years, and what you expect to see, which could easily be two different things? Start with Dr. Underley.
Great, thank you. That being said, I am a strong advocate for our public schools, and what I would advocate for is that we would stop voucher expansion. I want to make sure that our public funding stays in our public schools. I'm not going to say, well, just because it's in law, or just because it's here, for 30 years, it's not going anywhere. That may be true, but I'm not going to roll over and just live with it. I want to stop expansion because it is becoming too expensive. And what it's doing is it's taking the money out of our public schools. And as I shared, I'm the only candidate who's running a school district right now during this pandemic. And I see firsthand how hard hit our public schools are. Our public school kids are hit by these funding shortfalls. And we need to invest in things like technology and smaller class sizes. And our public schools are struggling and assuming these costs, especially during this pandemic. And we see this in every election by the number of referendums that are passed. So in the short term, certainly I care about the kids that are in voucher schools, and we want to make sure that they're getting a great education as well. But there's certainly things that we need to look at with accountability. For example, in admissions, kids are not discriminated against when it comes to admissions, but once they're enrolled, for example, in a private voucher school, those protections are no longer there. We also need to look at things like special education reimbursements and making sure that public schools are reimbursed the same amounts. And as when we look at accountability with the report cards, looking at opt-outs, private school vouchers can opt out, any number of kids that they would like, whereas in public schools, it's only 5%. So we need to make sure that we fight for every kid, and that's what I plan to do, and not just for the kids that are in, the unaccountable voucher system. We need to keep our resources, especially though, and that includes our funding in our public schools, but it also means our kids. When we take kids out of public schools and put them in voucher schools, we're making our public schools more segregated as well. So school choice has been bleeding our public schools, particularly in Milwaukee, and that's not okay. So accountability measures are important, no opt-out.
Dr. Kerr.
Well, this obviously is a very big difference that divides a lot of us, and even with me and my opponent. I'm beholden to kids and families and educators in that order. My opponent is beholden to teachers' unions. And I don't think she understands what the role of the state superintendent will be, because there are 10% of school-age children there are more than 10% of our school-age children that are not in public schools. And the duty of the state superintendent is to serve all children and make sure that they have a high quality education. So my vision to create a world-class education system for all children means all means all. And so the role though, the change that we need to think about is, how do we create a level playing field? How do we ensure accountability, full transparency, and equitable access to make sure all of our schools are doing great work? The state superintendent cannot make this policy. That is very disingenuous for her to say that she can put a moratorium on these schools or advocate for not expanding these schools. I had a great conversation last night with parents from these private and charter schools and voucher schools, and they care so much about their children. They have beautiful, brilliant children, just like our public school children. And I want to remind you all that I served public schools for 34 years. My vision is to bring everyone together to the table so that that we all work together to decide how we can best meet the needs of all kids. And I'm just going to say, the former state superintendent and the governor, he couldn't stop it. I mean, it expanded under his leadership. And he said a couple of years ago that vouchers are here to stay. And so as governor, he could veto any expansion, but that's his role now. So I, as the superintendent, will follow the law. I am not going to kick Black and brown students out of their schools. Our public schools could never even take this amount of students into our public school sector, if you want to think about that. So regardless of where a child is taught, we need to agree that all kids deserve a high quality education. And so, I think what's interesting is that, there are more kids in the voucher system in Appleton and Green Bay than in her small district of Pecatonica. And so when you think about that and that perspective, and that's why it's going to take someone with experience in working in all cross sectors to bring people together and unify around education, because that's just going to be what's needed to recover from this pandemic.
A couple blocks up the street from the Department of Public Instruction offices, there's this really large building. I think it's called the State Capitol.
Yeah.
A lot of the people in that building don't get along so well. Extreme partisan divisions between the governor, the Republican leadership in the Assembly and the Senate. What would be your approach to dealing with all of these people in the Capitol, both the governor's office and especially both houses of the legislature? Dr. Kerr, it's your turn first.
Okay. Well, thanks for pointing out a reality that we are living with every day, right? And that's, I think, what people are just tired of, the polarization and the political fatigue. And, I believe that I can bring people together. So I have experience of working with a divided school board, a divided community, and divided government. And so this is going to be important for us, bringing people together. And right now, because of the partisan issues on this campaign, there are many people that can't speak up, that they don't have a voice, even though they want to support me as the next state superintendent. And so I don't think the platform that my opponent is running on will get any traction. They're non-starters. So I believe that I have the ability to work with people. I have passed teacher licensing law with the legislators at the state capitol, and we did have bipartisan support. In Brown Deer, Lena Taylor, Alberta Darling would come to every 4th of July parade. They all visited my school throughout their sessions in the legislature. And my team, my diverse team, testified at joint finance several times. And we were recognized for having one of the most diverse teams and speaking our truth about what the needs of our kids were in Brown Deer. And so it's time to put the politics aside, because there's no room for politics in education.
Dr. Underley.
Thank you. Just to respond, about partisanship, but also the fact that Deb says that I'm beholden to the unions. First, I'm not beholden to anybody. Unions support me because I am pro-teacher, and being pro-teacher is being pro-kid. I'm also very proud of that, because great teachers make great schools. And just like labor everywhere, people need to be acknowledged and appreciated for their knowledge, their skills, and abilities. Unlike Dr. Kerr, who had called Act 10 a gift, which, balancing the budget shortfalls on the backs of employees. And that gift is coming back to haunt us. Here we are 10 years later, and our school districts are going to referendum after referendum after referendum. And I do not see that as a gift at all. As superintendent, I'll work with anyone, Republicans, Democrats, to improve schools for our kids. I agree, and I support Governor Evers' budget proposal for our schools, but there's a divide, as you indicated, right now in government. And that means both sides have to come together for the good of our kids and find common ground. We see it every election. When school districts pass the referendum, people throughout Wisconsin, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, they support their public schools. They come together for our kids. And the role of DPI is to help everybody do that. It's to advocate for kids, advocate for our economy, advocate for our state. And as state superintendent, I'll work very hard with both sides to make sure that kids have what they need to be successful. I have a record of working with school boards I have record of working with unions, other groups as well, parents, for example. And we need to make sure that we are all united in the cause for public education. When we talk about leadership, I have what it takes. I've balanced budgets. I've not had any controversy around this. I think we need to talk about the fact that my platform is rooted in equity, and Dr. Kerr just dismissed that. By saying that my platform for equity is not realistic, that's a problem. I've led my school district to high achievement. My entire campaign is about equity. I have strong financial management in my district. I've kept my district open for in-person learning. Deb doesn't have the judgment to lead the state. She has financial mismanagement in her background, and she hasn't led a school in reopening. So yes, it is becoming partisan, but we need to be realistic. We need to do what's best for all kids, and I'm the person for that job.
Wisconsin, unfortunately, has for many years had enormous gaps, whether you call them achievement gaps, opportunity gaps, whatever label you want to put on it, enormous gaps between how higher income and lower income students are doing, between how white students and minority students, especially Black students, are doing. Some of the largest and sometimes the largest in the country. Why haven't these gaps been closed? What needs to be done to do it? And specifically, what would you do as the state superintendent to help close these gaps? Dr. Underley first this time.
Sure. I believe that every kid deserves access to a high quality public education. And to do that, we need to close these opportunity gaps. We call them achievement gaps, because I think by doing so, we're putting the blame on our students. But in reality, it's decades and even a century of just racist policies and everything from housing to voting to discipline practices and hiring practices in our schools. So I prefer opportunity gaps because that's what they are. These are gaps based on the fact that where you live determines your opportunities, and the kids with more opportunities have better achievement. There's an old saying that there's no do-overs in education, and that's why we have to make sure that every kid, regardless of their zip code, gets a world-class education here in Wisconsin. And that's especially true with our students of color, and that starts with changing the systems of inequity that hurt our students. The gaps existed well before the pandemic, and they have been exacerbated during the pandemic as well. I think we should acknowledge that we need to get back to the face-to-face instruction, of course. Our schools are open, the modes are varied, of course, and we have to address the gaps, and that's what my platform does. It looks at early childhood education and expanding preschool for everyone, like I did in Pecatonica. Better recruitment and retention of high-quality teachers in all our schools, and a more fair and equitable school finance system that works for all public schools in Wisconsin. We need to improve our facilities. When you look at inequity, you can just drive around the state of Wisconsin and look at our school buildings. The average age of a school building in Milwaukee is 85 years old. And then you just drive down I-94 and you see these cathedrals to learning. We need to make sure that when we talk about equity and we look at opportunity, that our kids have access to the same facilities that are, just wonderful 21st century environments. We have to look at rural internet as well. And we have to look at affordability of internet in our urban areas too. So there's inequity everywhere. And this is what, causes these gaps in learning and standardized test scores. And like I said, we have to make sure that we're investing in the things that we know are going to change the game. Early childhood education, passionate, high quality teachers, mental health, as well as our facilities, and just equalizing that playing field. We have to keep our foot on the gas. We have to keep investing in our kids because that's what sets the entire state up for success.
Dr. Kerr.
Well, first of all, I've been crisscrossing the state, meeting with all stakeholders about what should be the priority of the next state superintendent. And I want to remind everybody on this call today, I have spent over 40 years in education, and 20 of those years have been as a Wisconsin public school superintendent. And I'm the only candidate that's turned around a district who has worked with Black and Brown students and families to close achievement gap, raise achievement, and get high rates of graduation in our school district in Brown Deer. And all of these activities are scalable. I work closely with my teachers during Act 10. My opponent was not a superintendent during Act 10, so she does not understand some of the nuances that we had to deal with. There isn't a superintendent across this state that did not utilize the tools that were needed to make changes to the budget. Just in Brown Deer, we were able to save $650,000 because we changed insurance programs. But we used that $650,000 to reinvest in our teachers and make sure that we had interventionists hired. My teachers and I have always had a great relationship, and that's why my teachers, all the teachers I have ever worked with, they endorse me because they know what my leadership is, and I'm going to run on my record of reform and transformation. You know, we passed referendums in Brown Deer. We're not a rich school district, but the community invested in education. And so that's what the community and the constituents want now. They want us to reinvest in education. We need to go back to doing things in a different way, not the old way of doing things. We need to make sure that all of our kids have equitable access and opportunity to excel, no matter where they come from and where they live. And so this is different because the DPI has been paralyzed in their leadership, not providing enough support and resources to help all of our superintendents across the state move forward.
The winner on April 6th will be sworn in, if I'm correct. I'm pretty sure I am, on July 1st, which would be the height of the summer and heading right towards the start of the next school year, which the circumstances are going to be pretty dicey. Going back to full in-person, let's hope, transitioning out of this weird year we've had. What would be your role as a state superintendent in helping schools get back to normal and helping kids recover? Deb Kerr goes first this time.
The role of the state superintendent is to make sure that all of our school districts, all of our school leaders have the supports that they need to open up their schools safely. I know our school boards, our state leaders, they've been working really hard to make sure that all the medical protocols are in place right now for opening. And it's going to be a challenge. However, we need to be responsive to the needs of all of those folks across the great state of Wisconsin. And so that's why my diverse leadership team will be out in the field. I will be out in the field helping to support all of our school districts to make that success happen as they integrate into full face-to-face instruction. The other aspect, so right now, one of the areas of challenge is that I know our teachers and our leaders would like to have evidence-based curriculum available because we know we're going to be dealing with mental health, social emotional learning, and trauma as these kids come back to school. I am hoping that all of our school districts will take a look at what it would take to offer some creative learning experiences during the summer so that it's not such a shock to start school back in the fall. I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of catching up our kids. We need to accelerate learning for all kids. We need to provide robust summer learning activities that are not only remediation, but enrichment as well. Our kids need to get back to socialization with their friends and their teachers. I think that in itself would be therapeutic, trying to get back to school and having them in a situation where they're getting some structure, they're being fed during the summer so that they can get back to whatever the normal is going to look like. But the DPI state superintendent needs to be supportive with great communication. So I would be putting out communication on a weekly basis to all of our constituents and making sure that we're responsive to whatever the needs are of our stakeholders.
Jill Underley.
All right, thank you. Yes, certainly that is what happens. The state superintendent will take office here in the middle of the summer, and we're optimistic that we will be returning back to quote unquote normal, I suppose, in the fall. So the highest priority will be to make sure that our buildings are open for in-person learning for our kids. You know, in-person learning certainly is the best way to educate our kids, and it's best for not just our workforce, but also our economy. I'm the only candidate, like I said, who has been successfully running a school district this past year, and we've learned a lot. You know, certainly March 2021 is different than March 2020 was. And As the state superintendent, be working with the legislature and all the different groups that would include like our parents groups and our school boards association, our administrators groups, to provide resources and guidance for our school districts. What we've learned at Pecatonica this past year is that there are certain needs that need to be met and areas that the state could provide some more resources, and DPI could help advocate for that. Internet, when we talk about virtual learning and we look at rural and urban and affordability, as well as connectivity, we need to be, as a state, organizing and mobilizing to get internet to everybody, not just our kids in our schools, but our workers and the parents, and it'll help everybody. We need to get mental health resources to our schools. We need more school counselors, but in the absence of that, what we've been able to do here at my school district is we've been able to use telemedicine and utilize a vendor to help, with our kids with anxiety and depression. But we also need to acknowledge that there's a lot of anxiety among staff too, and we need to support staff in the return to school in the fall. When we talk about, what's going to help kids, quote unquote, catch up, we need to look at after school programming and enrichment, as well as remediation for those things, as well as just, good social play. I feel that would be important as well. I've talked to parents, and in my community and in other communities, they don't want necessarily summer programming. They don't want remediation. They don't want their kids in front of screens this summer. They want to get out. They want to maybe take that vacation that they didn't have before. They just want to go visit family, maybe visit grandparents who are now vaccinated that they haven't seen in over a year. So I think we need to be careful when we look at, over planning and over scheduling our kids as well as our staff this summer. And I think we need to acknowledge that, we've survived the pandemic. Our kids have survived the pandemic. Our families have survived the pandemic. And we need to, approach it from that perspective. And as the state superintendent of DPI, I'm not going to force anything on our school districts, but what I'm going to do is listen to them, listen to their needs, listen to the local school boards and the teachers, and, get them the resources for the things that they need, that they know will make a difference in their communities.
This has become an issue in the campaign in recent days. How would each of you assess the current structure and effectiveness of the Department of Public Instruction? What would you like to see happen to the way DPI itself is run in the next 4 years? Dr. Underley.
Yeah, absolutely. DPI is a really neat organization. There's a lot of individuals in there who, when you look at, their hearts are in the place where they want to do what's best for public school kids and all kids in general. So when I look at DPI, having worked there, there's a lot of individuals who are constantly working on guidance. They are managing a lot of grants, just state as well as federal. So DPI is a big compliance organization as well. But there's other aspects, the customer service side, when we look at educator licensing, we look at maybe even the special education and implementation of guidance and different grants. That's the customer service side as well as the compliance side. And then we also have the technical assistance side, and that's the part of DPI that I would like to make more robust. Right now, during the pandemic, we've learned that we can get out statewide. We don't have to be traveling all the time. We don't have to be necessarily face-to-face. We could certainly do a combination, making sure that we reach every part of the state. And that's something that I know that DPI has tried before with, and been successful, with working in partnership with our CISA organizations. There's 12 CISAs. I think there's 6 WEOP organizations throughout the state. So like Wausau, Eau Claire, Milwaukee, among others. And when we look at DPI as a structure, the foundation is there, the framework is there that we can use as a conduit to get messaging out. I would like to, like I said, work on the technical assistance side. Certainly there's some, concerns that we need to address with customer service, like with educator licensing. But with the technical assistance side, you can get all those experts, with their professional development hats on, and develop webinars and develop, technical assistance guides, whatever it takes to help school districts directly. And this can be from simple things, with managing a grant, but it also could be some, best practices in virtual learning, or how to deter vaping. There's a lot of things going on in our schools that our school districts look to DPI for leadership and guidance on. And so that's the technical assistance side that I would like to make more robust. Certainly there's some organizational needs, like with communications. I would like to strengthen the communication side of DPI. I feel that there is an untapped potential as far as, educating the entire state, and we can certainly do this through our libraries, because DPI does oversee the libraries too. We could look at how we can use our libraries, as well as the communications arm of DPI, to educate the state on things like school funding, or to educate the state on things like how libraries are funded as well. And again, there's just so much potential. When you look at all the aspects of learning, like environmental education and drug and alcohol abuse mitigation. I mean, there's a lot of things that I think adults certainly want to know more about too, that DPI could take the lead on. And so my agency will be, educating everybody, but making sure that we're really using the individuals who work there to get their expertise out to the rest of the state.
Dr. Kerr.
Well, the DPI is not fine. It's not a very neat workplace at this point. First of all, representation of people of color they're far and few between. And so my vision is to create and reform the DPI from a regulatory agency to a customer service agency. These are the words I'm hearing from my fellow superintendent colleagues all across the state. I had a meeting last week in the Fox Valley, and they want DPI to be a thought leader. That was one of the comments from one of the superintendents, not a regulatory agency. So there are plenty of reasons why we need to continue to have our local control focus. We need our DPI to understand the needs of our local areas and our superintendents. So the point of my initiative to decentralize the DPI is to first get superintendent designees working in other areas of the state to support the children and the families. We need to create a new mission and vision with values and goals, that the agency will be transparent and have goals that we accomplish. That will be essential to helping us move from a bureaucratic regulatory agency to a customer service kid-focused agency. And so it's not expensive. We will certainly do a cost-benefit analysis, but that's a response from a person who is a bureaucrat. When something is too hard, you deflect, you defend, and you dismiss it. So I want to bring up a couple points. Rent in the Isthmus of Madison is unlikely higher than any of the other locations. Governor Evers just requested moving forward with a new Milwaukee state office, so there might be opportunity there. The DNR just opened a brand new Milwaukee facility. DCF just opened a brand new facility within the last 10 years. And so I think we need to think about what are the possibilities of partnerships between the DPI, 72 counties, and all the services that they provide, as well as Division of Children and Family Services. So yes, a review of all DPI positions will be essential based upon their purpose, whether it's regulatory, operational, academic support, programming, whatever that is. But the program should be run near the populations they are serving, okay? And so that's why I think there should be a school choice office in Milwaukee, because that's where the majority of our kids are being served, and they need just as much support as our public school kids. And so the final point I want to make is that, my opponent is resistant to say that she wants to reopen schools, especially for our most vulnerable and marginalized learners. But her campaign team filmed a YouTube video last week in a school that was probably closed. And so while our Black and brown kids in Milwaukee, Beloit, Racine, Madison are not in school, you're filming in a school. So, I think you need to answer, where were those political ads shot, and how can you propose opening or not opening schools when you're filming a political campaign?
I think we need to give Jill Underley a chance to respond to that.
Yeah, that's fine. Yes, I did do some video filming, and the school is a school that is open. So we had a COVID compliance individual who was there to help with making sure everything was done safely and everything was cleaned. Thanks for bringing attention to that. But yes, the school itself is open and the kids are in face-to-face learning there. So I appreciate that. But just also the fact that I know that Deb is very concerned about, making sure kids are back in school and that they're getting the resources and whatnot right now. But when we look at that, we have to think about where were these claims, where Black and brown kids were being disenfranchised before the pandemic. Certainly they were not getting the resources that they needed to be successful in many schools. So I think that we need to address this and that the financial costs here are not adding up. I mean, when we look at Deb's decentralization of DPI proposal, for example, it's another example of Dr. Kerr not understanding how to financially manage a large budget. She doesn't know the costs or research the costs. This is an expensive endeavor, and Deb is not acknowledging the costs of, moving employees, setting up new offices, but then also the transition costs. When we're moving DPI around, are we supposed to just stop school? I mean, DPI certainly is a regulatory agency. It has to be. When you look at IDEA and you look at Title I and all the federal programming, that stuff has to continue. Schools are really looking at DPI to make sure that there's no more disruption, especially in the fall when kids are going to be coming back face to face. So again, another example of Dr. Kerr's bad financial decision making. Nobody ever said they want more DPI. All right, let's get more DPI, right? No, people don't want that. People want local control. And so let's use these resources that you would use to decentralize and move DPI around to spend locally on more teachers, on more school counselors. Let's reduce class size. Let's improve our school buildings. Let's not spend this on an expensive endeavor to solve, to have a solution to a problem that doesn't exist.
Well, that's obviously a disagreement that we have because the DPI has been paralyzed through this whole pandemic. You would think that the DPI would have asked joint finance for increases in any appropriations to best serve our Black and brown kids. You would think that the DPI would have passed legislation working with the legislators to fund and reopen schools a little sooner. And so I have had experience in working in all sizes of districts, not just a small rural district in Pecatonica. I have managed $1 million budgets and at the national level, almost $1 billion. And so your challenge to my financial and fiscal management just shows your inexperience in dealing with larger organizations and some of the personnel issues that come up when you're dealing with a large group of employees. And so I have managed thousands of employees successfully. I have put people into the teaching profession. I have recruited diverse administrators. And so we need to move forward. We need to transform education and we need to transform the DPI.
As I said,
quickly to that, I have
real quickly. We're actually running out of time.
I don't want this, but my high school principal is one of the only Latino high school principals in the state of Wisconsin. So I've been intentional, with how we hire, in Pecatonica. Just because we're small, 2/3 of Wisconsin school districts are my size, and so I think we need to acknowledge that. Rural Wisconsin is a lot of Wisconsin. It's not just focused on Madison, Milwaukee. But when Deb talks about financial management, she talks about HR. Let's talk about the fact that, 10 years ago, there was a $500,000 budgeting error in her school district, and she supposedly fired a business manager, but then he got moved on through a glowing recommendation of hers.
Well, let's stop this right now because you have brought this up. You intentionally called Dan Bice from the Journal Sentinel. You need to denounce this ad because you put my personal cell phone all over the state on this ad. So you have been the one that has calling this to attention. And you're dividing not only Brown Deer, but the state of Wisconsin, because anyone who knows how to run HR organization knows that there are certain Gordian knot problems you have in dealing with personnel. So the letter of recommendation was part of a standard HR procedure during pre-Act 10 Wisconsin. And so you can call attention to it, but we won every charge at the state and federal level. Everything was dismissed. Final, period.
As I said at the
Right,
start,
passing on the litigation doesn't seem like a standard HR procedure.
No, and you know what? I saved millions of dollars from 2 other school districts because he had done the same exact thing. And my board knew exactly what was going on the whole entire way, because this lawsuit wouldn't have lasted for 9 years if my school board wasn't with me side by side. So again, you can only read what you can read in the paper, but you don't know the details of any kind of agreement that was negotiated and agreed upon. So I think you need to apologize for that.
I'm going to ask you both to stop at this point on that score. As I said at the start, the race has become a little contentious. And there are important subjects I wish we could talk about, but we are heading toward the conclusion here. We didn't really get into special ed or reading, 2 subjects I really think are important. So let's head towards a final statement, a closing statement from each of you. And I would frame it around the thought of what would you like people to say about you as state superintendent at the end of 4 years? Frankly, I forget who went first now at this point. Let's, I think at the start, Deb Kerr went first. So we'll let Jill Underley go first here.
Okay. So the question, Alan, just to reiterate, is what you want people to say about you at the end of your 4 years, right? That's it. Okay. Perfect. So the future of Wisconsin public education is on the line. Okay, Wisconsin faces a real choice to elect someone who wants to make sure that every student has a great school and real opportunity, or somebody who wants to divide us, waste our precious resources, and pick winners and losers among our students. And so at the end of the day, or at the end of the 4 years, my hope is that people will say about Jill Underley as state superintendent that she is a fair Wisconsin state superintendent who put the public first, that she worked across the aisle as well as with teachers and school boards, raised achievement for the students who have had the fewest resources, especially our Black and Brown youth, our English language learners, our special education students, and our high poverty schools. But Jill is a strong financial leader in the state of Wisconsin, helping school districts get the resources that they need, advocating with the state legislature to make sure that we are instituting proven systems that will raise student achievement. I'm the candidate that is firmly on the side of children in our schools, their families, as well as our educators. And again, I just feel that the state of Wisconsin will be really impressed by my ability to innovate and bring real game changers to public schools in Wisconsin.
Deb Kerr.
At this time in history, I am the most experienced and uniquely prepared to lead our great state of Wisconsin out of this pandemic and recover as the next state superintendent of public instruction. We need to get back to the instruction part of this job. I've turned around public schools for the past 34 years of my career. My vision is to create a world-class education system that is the highest performing in the country by working with all stakeholders to unlock a limitless field of opportunity, ensuring excellence and equity for all Wisconsin's children. Our DPI, it'll be our DPI, must serve as a beacon of hope, a significant area of source of support, and a very responsive customer service agency that is more about support, thought leadership, and learning than compliance. The voice of the state superintendent should be welcomed in the halls of the legislature. We need to build bridges to unite our efforts around education. I have relationships with legislators on both sides of the aisle. We need a state superintendent who can walk into any of the offices and start working on policy from day one. We will need someone who's got a good enough relationship to push back when policies don't reflect evidence-based practices. At the end of the day, I need you to carefully consider, look at our resumes, don't look at our pictures, don't look at our website, but look at the qualifications. And here's what I hope happens after my first 4 years at the state superintendent. I want everyone to know who the Department of Public Instruction is, what they do, and what they're accountable for. I want everyone to know who the state superintendent is, because this is an important role to advocate for all kids. I have made promises that I know I can keep. We're going to transform the DPI into a customer service agency rather than a regulatory agency. We're going to unify the state and have a working relationship with legislators. We are going to implement back to the basics of phonics and reading to make sure all of our kids are on a higher level of trajectory, just like other states have done it, like Mississippi and Florida. I want all parents and students to feel that they have a voice because they are partners with us in creating this world-class education system. The DPI will have a clear mission, vision, with values and goals, and a strategic plan to help us move forward with great communication. We will be a repository of resources, and we will assist in solving problems. You will be able to get a human being when you call the DPI, someone that will answer the phone and take great care of you. And if they don't know the answer to your question, they will work diligently to find that answer. And so I hope at the end of my 4 years that we have reversed this trajectory to put Wisconsin students on a path to better outcomes, higher levels of expectations, and great opportunities. Thank you.
I think in international diplomatic circles, this would be called a candid and frank exchange, which is a euphemism for both of you being pretty forward about what you think. And I really want to thank each of you for being part of this. More broadly, the two of you have been doing a lot of joint events. I think that's a real public service when it comes to this campaign. And I want to thank both of you for being open to these kind of exchanges. I hope they're informative to voters. Again, the election is April 6th, and it is the only statewide issue on the ballot this year. So the chances that it'll be a low turnout election are high. But the one issue I can take a stand on is to encourage everyone to be knowledgeable about this and to come out and vote. And I hope by this exchange, we've helped spread that level of awareness of what each of you stand for and what's on the line in this election. So thank you, Deb Kerr. Thank you, Jill Underley. Thank you to everyone who's been listening to this. And I urge you to take steps on April 6th to vote and to be involved and helpful to education as a whole in the state of Wisconsin. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you too, Alan.
Thank you.